I've done this job for a long time, and I've had some tremendously odd guests, including one guy who wheeled a taxidermied dog into the reception area and kept telling it to sit and behave. In fact, I've a long list of truly strange people who have visited my hotel. And it's a great way to make small talk at a party, because we all love a good story about creeps and weirdos. When I speak to other people in the hospitality industry, there'll always be a swapping of stories. But in some ways, it's never quite right. Recently, I had one guy from a few towns over say, "I have two main concerns with each new guest. What mess will they leave? And will they try and attack me?" And I laughed, because it's true. But it's not the whole truth, at least not for me. Because my main concern isn't someone leaving behind smelly sheets. It's that sometimes, around once or twice a year, at least one of our guests will never actually check out. They just vanish. It's gotten so bad now that every day I sit and wait, watching whoever comes down the stairs, hoping that everyone due to check out actually checks out. It's not that it happens often, just that when it does happen, we know there's going to be a tough few days ahead of us. It's the cleanup, you see. First time it happened, I wondered if maybe there was a weirdo convention around the area or something. I know that there are some people out there who get off on knowing others are cleaning up their mess, but it's not like that. It's worse. We had one yesterday. It came time for 12 o'clock, and like normal, about half a dozen or so of our latest guests came down ready to check out. Like always, except one guy didn't. I had to pull up his file just to remember his name, and the receptionist gave me a half-decent description. I got the lift to the 14th floor with a dry mouth and nervous stomach, hoping to God he'd just overslept. But when it came to knock on his door, there was no response. Sure enough, the room was empty and in a terrible state. I stepped over the ripped-up carpet, ducked below the torn-out ceiling fan, and tried not to retch at the smell and the revolting mess in the corner. The bed had been flipped and turned into some kind of children's fort, except the bedroll within was soaked in blood, and every mirror in the room had been smashed. When I walked up to the patio door, he'd sprung for a room with a view. I noticed bloody streaks by the handle, and a few torn fingernails on the floor. I hate it when it happens. I hate it not just because it takes weeks to repair the damage, and not just because some guy skips out on the bill, and not even because I have to call the cops who never seem to take me seriously. I hate it because of the tally. Almost everyone does the tally. Sometimes it's scratched on the floor with a loose screw. Sometimes it's written in blood or other stuff, or scrawled over whatever paper they brought in with them. But it's always there, dozens and dozens of tallies stacked up in counts of 5. Sometimes it'll be as few as 20, sometimes as much as 800. I'm still not sure what it is they're counting. One time I found a photo. I didn't show it to anyone because, well, it made no sense, and I didn't want to freak anyone out. This guy, a photographer, had booked a room after we hosted a wedding here. He took the pictures, then stayed and had a few drinks, and spent the night in room 704. I remember he gave out a Polaroid camera to some kids, and let them run around the reception taking photos of everyone. He told me he was going to put them all in a book, and send it out to the couple, and I thought it was a pretty cute idea. Except, he never left in the morning. And sure enough, the room he stayed in was torn to pieces, and all the cameras he'd taken were smashed to bits on the ground. The tally, this time scratched into the bathroom tiles, went up to 73, and there was a whole bunch of Polaroids burnt to a crisp close by. One, however, had survived, slipped into a crack in the window, and it showed the wedding photographer. His face was close to the camera and all blurry, and his eyes were glassy and bloodshot, with tears streaming down his cheeks. Somehow, he'd grown a beard. There was a look on his face that was just... he was thin, super thin, and I don't know. He just looked insane, or maybe terrified. He looked like a meth addict, his eyes fixed on something behind the camera. Things like that can make me question my sanity. That photographer had torn the soles of his shoes free and tried chewing on them. And the guy from yesterday had jugs filled with his own fermenting urine. One woman, years ago, had even grown cress in the toilet system. I had to tell people that she brought it with her. It helps that we have so many weirdos, because if any of the younger staff ask or hear any rumours, I just shrug and blame it on the crazies. But I'll admit that me and some of the older staff know better than that. That's why only a few of us handle the clean-up. It's not right to send a young person to clean it all. When you find diaries filled with these notes about how they'd fended it off and how it wasn't going to win. When you read the desperation in their notes and the messages they leave to loved ones, or find their excrement filled with the chewed up remains of their pillow stuffing, or the makeshift weapons made out of smashed up furniture, it stays with you, and over time it starts to mess with you. I spent years hoping it was all an elaborate prank. It was the way they all described being trapped in their room, and the sun never rising. I just know that can't be possible. It just can't. But I don't know what to think. I mean, could that guy have climbed out the window and shimmied down 6 stories of gutter piping? Sure, someone out there could be capable of doing that, but I doubt he did. I've even found blood-soaked baths and gory razor blades nearby, vomit filled with dozens of half-digested pills, even bloody and frayed nooses. How does any of that make sense? How does anyone lose that much blood and not leave a body? I live here in my own room, and sometimes I wonder if the guys will come in and find nothing but a tally to mark my disappearance. It terrifies me. The things I've been seeing in the mirror lately when I wake up make me consider therapy. Sometimes it looks like there's a hand pressed up against the glass. Other times it looks all dark, and I just catch glimpses of faces in the void, screaming and crying, and all gaunt with hunger. Other times it's like I'm looking down on the sickly green waters of some lake, and just beneath the surface, I can glimpse shifting shadows. And every now and then, there's a hand, often pressed up against the glass, sometimes looking like it's gripping the very frame of the mirror. It's not a human hand, just these long black fingers that in the darkness I can barely resolve with my groggy, sleep-deprived eyes. Every night there's something new, and it never makes any sense. Once I woke up, and I swear I watched a small ball come rolling right out of the mirror and onto my floor. I fell back asleep straight away, but sure enough, come morning, there it was on the floor. It reminded me of the kind of thing you'd find in a child's ball pit. But the worst has to be the tallies that I occasionally wake up to, drawn on the mirror, sometimes in soot, sometimes in lipstick, sometimes in the rusty brown of dried blood. Every time I leave the room and come back, they're always gone. Something I'm secretly glad of, if I'm honest, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to wipe them away. You see, they're drawn on the other side of the glass. I've taken down a lot of mirrors in this place, and I'm not sure that, if anyone were to ask, I'd have a concrete reason why. It's just that they're always smashed to pieces whenever someone disappears, and sometimes people make weird complaints. One girl came storming down the stairs, screaming about us all being weirdos. She made a huge deal about the creep and the one-way mirror and the breathing she heard. But even when I pointed out that her mirror was on a wall that faced a 7-story drop, she still wouldn't believe it was just a mirror. She was convinced someone was on the other side. "You're sick," she told me. "The whole messed up game you're playing with me is sick." And with that she left. Sometimes I think she had the right idea. Another time, a guy came down screaming about the woman in the parking lot. He grabbed me and told me she was out there, wandering down by the cars with blood dripping down her chest and an arm missing. He was so convincing I ran out there with him, thinking maybe I'd be faced with the scene of a grisly car crash. But there was no one there. The guy was shocked and confused, even a little embarrassed. He was so insistent about what he'd seen, he took me up to his room to show me the window. Except it wasn't a window at all. It was a mirror. I told him he was just sleep deprived, and he agreed, but left regardless. Both of us disturbed in some wordless way. You can't take all the mirrors down though. People complain, and that's fair enough. It's not like I even have a good reason, sane or otherwise. There's just a feeling of general unease I try to avoid by taking down any of the big ones. You know, the funny thing is, it didn't even dawn on me to take down my own mirror until recently. In my head, this was something that only affected guests. But like I said, lately I've been seeing things in there. So I went to pull it down, and I know this sounds stupid, it terrified me. The thought of touching it made my skin crawl, and my stomach turned to lead, and I just couldn't. I mean, I physically couldn't. I keep telling myself it was just fear, but it felt worse somehow. It felt like I was looking into someone's eyes that weren't my own. All I wanted to do was to turn away and ignore it, so in the end that's what I did. It was better than the alternative. Better than quitting and leaving someone else to deal with it. Every time I go to leave, that's what holds me back. The next guy below me, he's a good man, but he isn't up to it. He has kids. I mean, how would he have coped with what happened a few years back? Although I guess an equally good question is how have I coped? Because it was after that one disappearance that I started seeing things in the mirrors. They were a nice couple, sure enough. It happens to couples sometimes. Rarely, but it can happen. As soon as they didn't check out, my heart sank, and I made the long walk up to their room. Of all the things I expected, the drawings weren't that. You see, all over the walls were these kids' doodles. I've never seen a room like that. It was different, somehow. All around the mirror, they'd set up a barricade, complete with spikes made from bedposts, and a broken down rifle with the barrel bent 90 degrees. Shell casings littered the floor, and a hunting knife buried in the ground. I later found a load of survivalist equipment, complete with leaflets for a nearby shooting range. I never did find a diary or journal to get a sense of what happened to them, but the tally they had took up a whole wall. That was the longest one I'd ever seen. 811. There were so many of them that the first few had started to fade. I still don't know how any of it had happened, but I know the woman who went in, she was pregnant. No, I couldn't let anyone else see the things I have. Finding what I found in that bathtub has left me in ruins, and I couldn't leave anyone else to do the same. I see that little girl in my dreams every night, lying in the tub, cold to the touch. It took me weeks to scrub every mention of the word mummy off the wall.